I hadn't slept a wink that night. Not a single wink. And it wasn't the crying baby or the neighbor's barking dog. It was him. My husband's cousin. I didn't even know what I expected when he showed up at our door after midnight. Honestly, I didn't want him here at all. But there he was, leaning against the frame, half grinning like he owned the place, his voice low and teasing. "You awake?" he asked, as if it was the most normal thing in the world to knock on someone's door at 2 in the morning. I rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of why I even opened the door. "Yeah, I'm awake," I said, my voice rough. I couldn't hide how tired I was, and I think he noticed. He always notices. I knew from the start he had this way of getting under your skin. Every glance, every shrug, every careless laugh felt like it lingered too long. He was young, late 20s, energetic in a way I was painfully aware I wasn't anymore. My husband's cousin, funny, charming, and infuriatingly persistent. Somehow, he could make the air feel too thick, like every room he entered was suddenly too small, too hot. I'd spent the evening trying to wind down. A quiet bath, a cup of chamomile tea, thinking maybe this weekend I'd finally manage some rest. But now, just standing there in my hallway, I could already feel my resolve slipping. "Can I come in?" he asked. Not really a question. More like a challenge. I hesitated. The old part of me, the part that had always wanted to be polite, made me nod. He stepped inside, shaking the dampness from his jacket, and the faint smell of smoke and city streets followed him. I could feel the tension like static in the air. He wasn't supposed to stay long. Just a quick chat, he said. But somehow, that always ended differently. I glanced at the clock. 2:30 in the morning. My husband was asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware, and I hated him just a little for that. Hated myself a little, too, for standing here, letting this happen again. He talked. A lot. About random things, meaningless things, but I listened. Half out of politeness, half because I couldn't tear my eyes from him. He leaned closer to show me something on his phone, a photo from a party I'd never gone to, and my hand brushed his. Too long, too casual, and I instantly pulled back, heart hammering. "You're quiet tonight," he said. His voice had that soft teasing edge, like he was enjoying something I couldn't name. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. My coffee was cold, the room too dark, the clock ticking too loud. And then, he smiled, that infuriating, knowing smile, and whispered, "You don't have to hide it from me." I wanted to tell him to leave. I wanted to slam the door. I wanted to pretend this hadn't happened. But instead, I just stood there, frozen, and that smile, it stayed with me longer than it should have. And in that moment, I realized I had no idea how this night was going to end. I closed the door behind him, though it wasn't really closed. He leaned against it, just a little too casually, like he had no intention of leaving anytime soon. That's what made him so exhausting. You never knew where you stood. My husband, Daniel, was out of town for the weekend. He trusted his cousin more than I did, which only made the tension worse. I'd always liked him in small doses, funny, easygoing, always full of energy, but there was something about the way he lingered that made my chest tighten. Something about the way he looked at me, like he remembered things I'd already tried to forget. I poured another cup of coffee, cold now, but still better than nothing, and gestured for him to sit. He dropped into the chair like he belonged there, legs stretched, jacket half on the floor. He had that boyish grin that could make people forgive almost anything, and somehow that made me mad. I hated that I noticed. "You've changed the living room," he said, scanning the space like he hadn't been here a dozen times before. But I knew he noticed more than just the furniture. He noticed the little details, pictures on the wall, books on the shelf, the way I'd tucked a throw over the sofa just so. Small things, but they mattered to him in a way that made me self-conscious. I stirred my coffee too slowly, pretending not to care. "Yeah, just a few things," I said, trying to make it feel less empty while Daniel's gone. He tilted his head, watching me, eyes sharper than I expected. "Does it feel empty?" I hesitated, because the truth was complicated. It wasn't just the apartment. Some nights, it felt like my life was empty in ways that Daniel didn't notice, ways I couldn't even admit out loud. And there he was, standing, or sitting, right in the middle of that silence, as if he could see it. I don't know," I muttered, not trusting my own voice. He smirked, leaning back, fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. "You'll tell me eventually," he said, like it was inevitable. And maybe it was. He had this way of slipping into my thoughts, a quiet persistence that made me question why I even resisted. I told myself it was nothing, just a cousin visiting, just a long night, but every laugh, every glance, every pause in the conversation felt loaded. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and the streetlights cast jagged shadows across the walls. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to read what he was thinking, while he watched me with the same calculated curiosity. Neither of us spoke for a while, and yet the silence felt alive, heavy, almost dangerous. I knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that by morning, everything could feel different. And maybe that was the scariest part, not knowing where this night would end, not knowing if it would even make sense by sunrise. By 3 in the morning, the coffee was long gone, and I was starting to regret even pouring the second cup. He hadn't left. Not that I'd expected him to, exactly, but there was a weight in the room now, heavier than the quiet ticking of the clock. "You're really quiet tonight," he said again, this time softer, almost teasing. But it wasn't teasing, not really. I could hear the way he listened for the smallest pause, like he was tracking every flicker of my hesitation. "I'm tired," I said. It was true, but also convenient. It was always convenient to hide behind fatigue. My hands wrapped around the mug, warm but trembling slightly, though I refused to let him see. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on mine. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said, and something in the tone made me flinch. Pretend. Like he could see past all the walls I built. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that some things weren't for him to know, but I didn't. I just nodded. There were other things I wasn't saying, things I'd never said out loud. The moments from my past, the missed chances, the regrets that kept me awake on nights like this, they hovered behind my eyes. And I knew, if I spoke too much, he would hear more than I intended. He shifted in the chair and glanced toward the door, then back at me, almost like he was testing boundaries. "Daniel doesn't notice these things, does he?" he asked casually, but I felt my stomach twist. Daniel didn't. Not really. Not the small details. Not the way the living room felt lonelier at night. Not the way I felt restless in my own life. I don't know, I said, and it was true again. Sometimes, even I didn't know. He smiled, that impossible, knowing smile, and I realized it wasn't just teasing anymore. It was deliberate. He wanted me to react, to let him in, even a little. And part of me, the part that had been quietly starving for someone to see me, wanted to. The wind rattled the window again, like it was echoing the tension in the room. And then, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Hope you're resting. Call me if you need anything." I stared at it for a long moment, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. Relief that Daniel wasn't here, and guilt that the presence of someone else, him, was making me feel complicated feelings I shouldn't have. He noticed my pause and tilted his head, eyebrow raised. "Something you're not telling me." I shook my head, too quickly, too sharply. The movement made me aware of every sound, every flicker of light, every shadow between us. I wanted him to leave, but I also didn't. I couldn't decide which I wanted more. And then, just as I thought I could breathe again, he leaned closer, whispering something I didn't catch. The words didn't matter. The sound of his voice, so close, so deliberate, sent a shiver down my spine. And I realized, with a sinking sense of inevitability, that by sunrise, nothing would feel the same. By 4, the apartment felt smaller than it had before. The shadows from the streetlights stretched across the walls like fingers, reaching toward us, mirroring the unease I could feel in my chest. He hadn't moved from the chair, though I knew he must have shifted at least a dozen times. There was a deliberate patience in the way he lingered, as if testing exactly how far he could go before I reacted. I tried to focus on the hum of the refrigerator, the distant noise of a passing car, anything to distract myself. But it was impossible. Every small movement he made drew my attention. The way his fingers tapped the armrest, the way he glanced at the books I'd lined up neatly on the shelf, the way he smiled when he caught my eyes lingering on him. "You know," he said quietly, leaning forward just slightly, "I never really understood why people pretend to be fine when they're not." I swallowed hard. My fingers tightened around my mug, making the ceramic creak. I don't know," I murmured. The words felt small in the vast quiet of the apartment. Maybe because it's easier than saying the truth. He nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, but there was an intensity behind that nod that made me want to pull back, even as part of me wanted to lean in. It was confusing. How could someone make you feel both seen and trapped at the same time? I thought about Daniel. About how different he was. How safe. How predictable. And yet, there was something about this cousin, this unexpected presence, that made the walls I'd built feel porous, fragile, like they could collapse at any moment. I don't usually do this, he said, voice low, careful, but there was a tension in it that betrayed him. Come over at this hour. Just sit. I can't sleep, I admitted, more truth than I meant to. And saying it aloud made it worse, because it was like handing him a piece of myself I didn't want anyone to touch. He leaned back again, eyes lingering on mine, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Maybe that's why we are still awake, he whispered. His words weren't loud, but they hit me anyway, somewhere deep I hadn't expected. The wind picked up outside, rattling the window, making the shadows shift again. My chest tightened, my palms felt clammy, and I realized I hadn't breathed properly in minutes. Something about his presence was overwhelming, and I wasn't sure if it was anger, fear, longing, or all of it at once. And then, just when I thought I might find the strength to say something, to set a boundary, he stood and moved closer, slowly, deliberately. Every heartbeat seemed amplified in the silent room, and I realized, with a sinking, uncontrollable feeling, that this night had gone somewhere I wasn't prepared for, and I had no idea if I could stop it. Just as the air felt impossibly thick, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at it, expecting another harmless message from Daniel. But this time, it wasn't him. It was a text from my sister. Did you see the news? I frowned, thumb hovering over the screen. What news? I whispered, though I didn't expect him to answer. He was already leaning against the wall, silent, eyes on me, as if he knew something I didn't. Before I could open the message, the TV flickered to life on its own, the old cable box buzzing. A news alert flashed across the screen. A car accident had closed the main road out of town. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just any road. It was the one Daniel had been taking tonight to get back early. I dropped the phone onto the couch, heart racing. Oh no, I muttered, more to myself than to him. He moved closer again, quiet now, the joking, teasing energy replaced by something heavier. Everything okay? His voice was low, cautious, but I noticed the way he held himself, stiffening slightly, as if he too felt the sudden shift in tension. I think Daniel might be stuck, I said. My words sounded brittle even to me. There's been an accident. I don't know if he's hurt. His expression softened for a moment, just a flicker, and then he stepped back, hands in his pockets. We should call him, he said, but there was hesitation in the suggestion. Hesitation that felt deliberate. I picked up the phone again, fingers trembling as I dialed. The line rang. And rang. And rang. Each second stretched longer than the last. I could feel him standing behind me, close enough that I knew he could smell the coffee on my hands, the faint lavender from my lotion. Finally, voicemail. Relief and panic tangled together. I hung up slowly, leaning back against the couch, trying to breathe. But the room no longer felt empty, no longer safe. The closeness, the silence between us, the unspoken tension, it had shifted. Something about the news, the accident, the fear for Daniel, made every glance, every brush of fingers, every pause seem electric. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched, and I realized with a jolt that the night had changed. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. Somehow, this unexpected crisis had made him unavoidable. I tried to think rationally, tried to focus on calling someone else, calling the police, making sense of the situation. But my thoughts kept slipping back to him. The way he had leaned forward earlier, the intensity in his eyes, the way he seemed to notice everything I didn't say. And now, with the fear for Daniel tugging at my chest, the line between what I should feel and what I did feel was blurring. Then, he stepped closer, hand brushing against mine as if by accident, or maybe not. I froze, every instinct shouting to pull away, but I couldn't. And in that frozen moment, I realized I had no control over the night anymore, no control over what it was becoming, or what I might do next. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the windows like it knew the room was too full of tension to hold. I barely noticed it anymore. All I could feel was him, standing too close, quiet now, watching me with that look I couldn't name, part curiosity, part something heavier. I shouldn't be here, I whispered finally, because it felt like the only truth left to say. My hands gripped the mug like a lifeline, knuckles white. You need to go. Daniel, he's my husband. He tilted his head, slow, deliberate, and I could see the shift in him. I know, he said softly. I just needed to be here. Just tonight. His words hung in the room between us, heavy and impossible to ignore. And I realized that in all the nights I'd spent trying to be careful, trying to manage my own loneliness, I had never prepared for this. The way someone could appear, uninvited, and somehow make you feel both alive and trapped in the same moment. I set the mug down, trembling, and took a step back. You're going too far, I said, though my voice didn't carry the certainty I wanted. He didn't move. He just watched me, silent, and in that silence, I felt exposed in a way I hadn't in years. My chest ached, heart pounding, as I thought of Daniel, of boundaries, of choices I had no right to make in that charged, fragile space. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the teasing grin from earlier, but something softer, almost regretful. I didn't mean to make it complicated, he said. I just wanted to be seen. And there it was. The truth beneath the tension, the unspoken drive behind everything, the part one recognized too late in myself. He had wanted to be seen, and in some strange, impossible way, I had wanted to see him too. My phone buzzed again. Daniel's name flashed on the screen, and relief rushed through me like cold water. I answered immediately, voice shaking. The accident wasn't serious. He was safe. I turned to look at him. He was already moving toward the door, coat in hand, the light from the street casting his shadow long across the floor. We didn't speak. Words wouldn't fix this, and I didn't think either of us wanted them. He paused at the doorway, fingers brushing the handle. Tomorrow, he said, barely above a whisper. We figure this out tomorrow. And then he was gone, leaving the apartment suddenly too quiet, the shadows retreating, but the echo of that night lingering. I sank onto the couch, exhausted, heart still hammering, knowing that nothing would ever feel the same. Not with him, not with Daniel, not with the choices that now waited for me. And just as I thought I could finally breathe, my phone lit up again. A new message, this time from an unknown number. I opened it. One sentence, we need to talk. Before he finds out. The unknown message sat on my phone, blinking, and I stared at it for what felt like hours. My hands were still shaking from the night, from him, from everything that had happened. I wanted to delete it, forget it, pretend none of this had ever occurred. But I couldn't. Not entirely. Daniel was safe now. The accident hadn't been serious, and he was already on his way home, oblivious to the storm that had raged inside our apartment. Relief washed over me, but it was tangled with guilt. For moments I hadn't meant to linger, for glances that had felt too long, for a presence that had invaded my quiet life. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, the steam curling up like a quiet exhale, and sat down on the couch. The apartment was still dark except for the faint glow from the streetlights outside. I could still feel him, the memory of his closeness, the intensity in his voice. Even in his absence, he left a kind of weight that wouldn't simply vanish. When Daniel finally walked through the door, exhausted but smiling, I hugged him tightly, the simple warmth of home grounding me. He asked a few routine questions about my night, and I lied gently, saying I'd slept fitfully. He didn't need to know. Some things were mine to carry alone. Later, I sat by the window, phone in hand, staring at the unknown message again. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit, a quiet reminder that some nights, some encounters, leave marks you can't erase. Marks that remind you who you are, what you want, and what you might risk if you're not careful. I thought about him, my husband's cousin, who had entered my life so unexpectedly and stirred emotions I hadn't realized I still carried. Part of me wanted to close the chapter completely, to return to the rhythm of my life as if nothing had happened. But another part, the part that still lingered in silence, knew this night would haunt me, in small ways, for a long time. I poured the last sip of coffee, the warmth seeping through my fingers, and let out a slow breath. Life would go on. Daniel would continue to be my safe harbor, and the night's intensity would fade with time. But I also understood that being truly seen, even for a moment, carries its own weight. Some nights, you are reminded that boundaries are fragile, and that even fleeting connections can shift everything you thought you knew. And sometimes, you have to carry those reminders quietly, letting them shape you without changing the life you've built. I put my phone down, closed my eyes, and listened to the city outside. The night had finally passed, but its echo lingered, a whisper of what was, and what might never be. And in that quiet, I realized I was both relieved and restless, safe yet awake to the possibilities I hadn't yet allowed myself to face.